it's Tony with Hidden Light Photography, and today we're going to be talking about noise, how to overcome it so you get the best quality photos that you can get. Now, there's a few different areas that noise comes from. There's shot noise, there's read noise, and then there's dark current. In today's video, we're going to be covering shot noise and read noise. So if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button. I don't want you to miss out on any upcoming content. Now let's head on over and learn about noise. In astrophotography, we have a term called noise. In fact, we see the term noise used everywhere. We have signal to noise ratio. Even in processing, we have processes like noise exterminator that help us reduce noise. But what is noise? Where does noise come from? And can we control noise? The whole goal to astrophotography is maximizing our signal to noise ratio. So understanding what noise is, where noise comes from, and how to control noise is absolutely crucial to maximize our signal to noise ratio, therefore giving us those quality images that we're looking for. And in an effort to effectively and easily explain noise, I thought back to a video that I saw a while ago, and I want to make sure to give credit where credit is due. Quiv the Lazy Geek does a very good job in explaining the subject of noise. In fact, he uses an analogy that's used by many people to explain the subject. But I want to make sure to credit Quiv because, well, Quiv's video is the one that I saw a while ago. Now, to do this analogy, unfortunately, I have to use a very bad word in the astrophotography world, and that word is rain. We're going to be learning about noise by comparing it to collecting rainwater. And it's easy to assume that rain falls evenly across the area. Now, for this rainstorm that we're going to be going out to here in just a moment, it's important to understand that the rate of the rainfall is going to remain constant throughout the entire demonstration. The rate of the rainfall is not going to decrease. The rate of the rainfall is not going to increase. It's going to remain the same. Here we have 4 buckets, and each of these buckets is going to represent the pixels of our cameras. Now, different cameras have different pixel grids. I will go ahead and just demonstrate the 533 here since it's an easy grid, 3008 pixels by 3008 pixels. Obviously, I don't have 3008 buckets, nor do I have the room to put 3008 buckets. So I'm going to use a very easy grid here, 2 by 2. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take our cover and we're going to go out into the rain and we're going to expose our buckets to the rain for 1 millisecond. And this is a very interesting result. We assume that the rain falls evenly across the area, but one bucket has 1 drop, another one has 2 drops, and some have no drops at all. They're just dry. It's a very weird thing, but it's not enough data to go off of. So let's dry out these buckets and let's go back out into the rain. But this time, let's expose the buckets for 1 second. Now, with the rate of the rainfall, we can expect 10 milliliters of water in each bucket. So let's head back out. We're going to expose our buckets for 1 second. And let's see. Well, this is weird. Now, my buckets all have water, but one has 9.8, one has 10.2, another one has 9.5. But I should have been able to get 10 milliliters with 1 second of exposure. Okay, so let's document that. Let's empty out the buckets and dry them, and let's try it again. So let's expose our buckets to the rain for 1 second, and let's see what happens. Well, I cannot explain this. This one had 9.8, it now has 10.3. This one had 10.2, it now has 9.5. This one had 9.5, now has 10.5. Now I'm not certain as to how much water each bucket is going to collect. Even though the rate of the rain didn't change, I exposed for the exact same amount of time from the first time to this time, but each bucket collected a different amount. I have a variance in each bucket between, 0.2, 0.4 to a whole milliliter. Well, that variance, that uncertainty between each exposure with each individual bucket, that's what we call shot noise. Let's take this up a notch. Each of these buckets has a capacity of 2,400 milliliters of water. I want to expose even longer, but I don't want to expose to the point that each bucket overflows. I don't want to lose any measurable amount. So I have to stay under 2,400 milliliters of water per bucket. If 1 second of exposure to the rain gives me 10 milliliters, 60 seconds of exposure should give me 600 milliliters. 600 milliliters stays within our 2,400 milliliter capacity. Let's empty these out, dry them up, and now let's expose our buckets to the rain for 60 seconds. Well, I got 595 milliliters. I have 610 milliliters. I have 605 milliliters. And I have 598 milliliters. So I'm still not collecting evenly. Now, if we were to expose and empty, expose and empty, expose and empty, and we did this for hours, okay? We just expose and empty. We're going to find each individual pixel, each individual bucket is collecting water. And every single time, each individual bucket has a variance of the water that it collects. Now remember, that variance is called shot noise, okay? Here's what we have. Here's what we find. Let's bring that to this. Let's point this at, M81. Pick your favorite target, point your camera at that target. That target is raining photons on your camera sensor, okay? Each sub-exposure that you take, each pixel, each bucket is collecting those photons. And as those pixels collect the photons, they empty out and they just keep collecting for hours, right? And there's always a variance in how many photons each pixel is collecting, just like we saw here. Now, when we had 1 second exposures, we had variances of 0.1, 0.4, etc. With 60 seconds, we had variances of 5, 10, 3, etc. With 1 second exposure, we had an expectance of 10 milliliters. With 60 seconds, we had an expectance of 600 milliliters. So as you can see, the longer you expose, the more rainwater you collect, but also the variances are a little bit more, but they're still proportional to the amount that you can expect. Also, each of these buckets has a capacity of the water that they can hold. Your camera has a capacity as to how many photons they can hold. It's called a full well capacity. This one is 65,000. When you're exposing, you don't want to expose long enough to where you overflow those pixels. So how do you measure? That's your histogram. You want to make sure that your histogram is off the left side of the wall. The left side of the wall is these buckets dry, empty and dry. So you want to make sure that your histogram curve is off the left wall of the histogram, but not exposing to the point where you overflow those pixels with photons. How do you overcome shot noise? So we know that as we expose, we can expect a certain amount of rainwater based off of the rate of the rain. With 60 seconds, we can expect 600 milliliters, and we have a variance of 5, 10, 3, so on and so forth. As we expose and empty, expose and empty, expose and empty, and we do this for hours, we're collecting all of that rainwater and we're putting it in a bigger bucket. We're also collecting the shot noise. In other words, we're collecting the shot noise. We'll take a single pixel. We're collecting 595 milliliters of water, and we have a shot noise of 5. We're collecting 610 milliliters of water, we have a shot noise of 10. And we're adding the shot noise, but we're also adding the signal, the water. And that signal is being collected at a higher rate than the noise. So as we take all of those sub-exposures and we stack them together, we are increasing our signal to noise ratio. In the beginning, that signal collects at a very high rate, and then eventually it levels off. It still increases, but it levels off and starts slowing down how it's increasing. That's called diminishing returns on investment. We'll get into that in another video. So now the question comes up. This is a very good question. So, hey, Tony, you said we need to stack a bunch of sub-exposures on each other to overcome shot noise. Why would I want to use a stack of 60-second exposures when I can get a lot more sub-exposures if I do 1-second exposures? That's a great question. As our pixels empty, right? We're going to call this our folder that we save all of our sub-exposures in. Those photons are converted into a digital signal and stored on the computer. I don't know if you can see, we have water that's left over as the bucket empties out. We take another exposure, and then we pour it back into the folder. We take another exposure, and we save it in our folder. And we do this for hours, okay? You're always going to have some water left over, some signal left over. That signal is going to be different. You might have 0.001 milliliter left on one. You collect more signal, you empty it out. Now you might have 0.12 milliliter left. And then you go collect more. And then you empty it out. Now you might have 0.03. That uncertainty, that variance between each pixel emptying out and what's left over, that's what we call read noise. So there's two ways to think of this. You have 1-second exposures. You had 10 milliliters of water, but you have a very small amount that's left over. That small amount is more closely proportional to the 10 milliliters as it would be to, let's say, the 60-second exposure at 600 milliliters. A few drops of water is closer to 10 milliliters than what a few drops of water is to 600 milliliters. The other way to think about this is when you do one 60-second exposure versus 60 1-second exposures, that read noise is calculated once in the 60-second exposure versus 60 times in the 60 1-second exposures. The read noise adds up just like the shot noise adds up. In other words, if you were to do 100 60-second exposures, you have 100 sets of read noise added up versus 6,000 sets of read noise added up in 1-second exposures for the same integration time. So, how do we overcome read noise? Read noise is the noise of your camera operating. You do bias frames in order to subtract out the read noise. And bias frames are just as fast as you can have your camera take an exposure. What that's doing is just gathering the read noise of the camera. And then you take a bunch of those quick, as fast as you can on your camera, and then you stack those up into what's called a master bias frame. And that master bias frame then subtracts out the read noise of your exposures. So, when it comes to a modern CMOS camera, the good news is these have very, very low read noise, right? That's why we say that bias frames aren't really necessary on these cameras. Now, don't get me wrong, they still have read noise, and so that's why you still do not want to do many short sub exposures. You want your sub exposure to be able to overpower the read noise. In other words, would you rather have a few drops compared to 10 milliliters, or would you rather have a few drops compared to 600 milliliters? And then adding up those few drops 60 times or 100 times versus adding those few drops 1,000 times for the same integration time. So I hope that you found this useful. If you did, do me a favor, that channel icon that popped up, hit that channel icon and subscribe. Drop a comment in the comment section. What questions do you have? Are you currently using a CMOS camera or using DSLR? Are you doing bias frames? And then check out that next video. Until the next time, clear skies.